Zane Fletcher leaned back in the reinforced steel chair, which groaned under the weight of his exosuit, and stared at the alien across the table. The alien who'd introduced himself as Counselor Varix of the Silari Union was still visibly tense, a faint film of translucent secretion forming along its pale blue neck slats. The translator embedded in the table clicked once before producing Varix's voice. "You consume that by choice?" Zane glanced down at the half-eaten burrito clutched in his gloved hand. "Yeah, it's breakfast." "You want one?" Varix recoiled, lower limbs folding in toward its thorax. "It emits corrosive vapors. We scanned the contents. Sodium levels exceed tolerable limits by over 200%. Capsaicin concentration alone could be considered a biological weapon under Silari law." Zane chewed slowly. "That's the hot sauce, yeah. Adds flavor. You willingly ingest substances that would cause necrosis in our species." "Well, I don't recommend it for your kind," Zane said, shrugging. "But here it's Taco Tuesday." Varix's 3 eyes narrowed. "You weaponized cuisine." "Nah," Zane said, wiping his mouth. "We just like it spicy." It had started as a routine cultural exchange. The Silari Union had extended an olive branch, one made of some bioluminescent vine from their homeworld in Earth, had responded with a delegation led by Zane, a former logistics officer turned diplomatic envoy, because everyone else with clearance had food allergies, and he didn't. That was literally the only reason he'd been chosen. The Silari had spent the first week politely declining every dish offered. They brought their own nutrient gels, bland gray goop that looked like melted chalk and smelled like wet cardboard. Every time Zane unwrapped something edible, Varix and the other Silari would either retreat or scan it in horror. Then came the incident. It happened on the 5th day during a joint briefing at the Joint Earth-Silari Habitation Dome in Arizona. The dome was climate-controlled, equipped with dual atmosphere filtration, and most importantly featured a modest snack bar to make Earth personnel feel at home. Zane had just finished a presentation on supply chain logistics when he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of hot sauce packets. He tore one open and squeezed it onto a slice of plain pizza. Varix watched, jaw trembling. Another Silari, a low-ranking technician named Rel, reached out with one of his upper limbs. "What is that?" Rel asked. "Hot sauce. Want to try?" Zane didn't think anything of it until Rel dabbed a drop onto his sensory pad and immediately collapsed. The dome erupted in chaos. Silari physicians screamed into their communication devices, misting Rel with neutralizing aerosols. Earth medical staff tried to intervene, but were barred from touching the alien. Zane stood frozen, holding the pizza slice like a loaded weapon. Rel recovered, but the damage was done. The Silari declared all human food biohazards. Earth officials scrambled to issue statements and reassign Zane, but Varix insisted he remain. "He must explain this," Varix had said. "We cannot proceed with diplomacy until we understand why your species poisons itself recreationally." And so Zane stayed. The next week became a bizarre routine. Zane ate while a panel of Silari observed from behind a thick transparent barrier. Every bite was documented, analyzed, and occasionally met with a gasp. By the 3rd day, something changed. One of the guards, a stocky Silari named Varn, lingered longer than necessary during Zane's mealtime. He didn't speak, but his eyes followed every motion, especially when Zane dipped his fries into a small tub of hot sauce. "You want some?" Zane asked. Varn hesitated, then stepped forward. "May I smell it?" Zane held out a packet. Varn took it with trembling fingers. He sniffed, flinched, then took a second, deeper whiff. "It is invigorating." Zane raised an eyebrow. "You seriously want to try it?" Varix intercepted the packet before Varn could respond. "Absolutely not. This is not a curiosity. It is dangerous. We are still investigating its effects." But the seed had been planted. 2 nights later, Zane woke to the sound of alarms. He grabbed his boots and stumbled into the corridor outside the guest quarters. Lights flashed red. Voices barked in both English and Silari dialects. A nearby Earth technician ran past him. "What's going on?" Zane called out. "Storage breach. Someone broke into the secure food locker." Zane's stomach dropped. He sprinted toward the kitchenette wing, dodging personnel and rolling carts. By the time he arrived, the scene was chaos. 3 Silari guards were wrestling with a 4th Varn. In Varn's clenched fist were 4 hot sauce packets. Zane stepped between them. "Stop. You're hurting him." He violated protocol. Varix barked from the doorway. He attempted to ingest a Class F hazard. "It's not a Class anything. It's just sauce." Varix turned to him. He subdued 2 guards with a cleaning drone and used its arm to pry open the containment locker. He risked exposure to 27 other substances we have not yet cleared. For sauce. Zane looked at Varn. The Silari's eyes were wild, yet focused. "Why?" Varn wheezed. "I dreamt of it. The scent. The fire. I wanted to feel it again." Varix ordered Varn confined to a medical quarantine. Protocols were updated. All human condiments were now stored under lock and key. But the damage rippled outward. Varn's act became legend among the Silari staff. Rumors spread. Some believed the sauce granted visions. Others said it triggered genetic awakening. A few claimed it was a form of human chemical communion. Zane tried to refocus the delegation's work, but each session was now colored by suspicion and fascination. The Silari were no longer afraid. They were curious. Too curious. He caught 2 more trying to barter for packets. One offered a vial of Silari stardust, a rare mineral used in quantum drives. Another tried to trade a navigational algorithm worth millions. Zane refused. "It's just hot sauce. You can't have it." Varix called a summit. "This is no longer a diplomatic issue. It is a containment crisis. Your food is destabilizing our crew." Zane leaned forward. "Then let them try it properly. Supervised. Just a drop. No more stealing. No more black market taco packets. You propose we integrate poison into our diet?" "No," Zane said. "I propose you stop treating us like we're made of nightmares." Varix hesitated. "What if it kills someone? Then we'll stop. But you've had 3 unauthorized incidents. You can't contain curiosity forever." After intense debate, a trial was approved. The first official tasting was held in a sterilized chamber. 3 Silari volunteers, including Varn, sat behind a sealed glass wall. Each was given a single drop of diluted hot sauce on a cellulose wafer. Zane watched as they consumed it. Varn shuddered. The second volunteer blinked rapidly. The third stood up and declared, "I see colors I cannot name." Medical teams ran diagnostics. No adverse reactions. Minor elevated pulses. Slight perspiration. Increased dopamine analogs. Varix was not pleased. "This does not mean it is safe." "No," Zane said. "But it means it's manageable." Within days, requests flooded in. Silari scientists wanted to study the chemical composition. Artists wanted to taste it for inspiration. A chef requested a sample to attempt fusion cuisine. The black market exploded. Packets vanished from Earth storage. Silari personnel began hoarding them, trading plasma filters and engine parts in exchange. 2 engineers got into a fistfight over a single packet. A lab assistant was caught trying to synthesize a replica and accidentally created a compound that melted through her workstation. Zane was ordered to mediate. He stood in the central dome, facing a room of agitated Silari. "You can't hoard it. This isn't some miracle compound. It's just hot sauce. We eat it with chicken nuggets." Varn stepped forward, voice firm. "It is more than that to us." "Then let's make it official," Zane said. "We'll open a regulated dispensary. Small doses. Supervised usage. Controlled supply." Varix reluctantly approved. The first Silari hot sauce station was built beside the dome's mess hall. Volunteers staffed it. A single drop per visitor per day. The lines stretched down the corridor. Scientists documented everything. Some Silari reported improved focus. Others claimed vivid dreams. One engineer composed an entire symphony within an hour of tasting it. But not everyone celebrated. A faction of traditionalist Silari declared the sauce a cultural contaminant. They accused Earth of biosabotage. Protest formed. The hot sauce station was attacked. Vials were smashed. One human technician was injured by flying debris. Zane rushed to the scene, found Varn shielding the remaining stockpile. "They're trying to ban it," Varn said. "We can't go back to tasteless gel. Not after this." Zane raised his hands. "Then we do it right. We make a case. We show it's not sabotage, it's just flavor." Varix arrived, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage. "This cannot continue without resolution." "Then let's hold a tasting conference," Zane said. "Bring in your leaders. Let them try. Let them see it's not poison. It's just sauce." Varix blinked slowly. "You would risk the fate of this alliance on a condiment?" Zane looked around at the waiting faces. "Yeah, I think we have to." The conference was approved, and it would change everything. The conference began 7 days after the last incident. They held it in Dome Theta, the only chamber large enough to accommodate both the Silari delegates and the invited observers from 14 allied species. The room's ceiling shimmered with an artificial sky projection calibrated to neutral tones to avoid overstimulating visitors. Rows of tiered seating curved around a central demonstration platform, where a single metal table stood under a sterilized canopy. On it sat a transparent container, locked and sealed. Inside, 6 packets of hot sauce. Zane had been instructed to stay behind the barrier until the final segment of the presentation. He stood alone, hands clasped behind his back, fully aware that every species present had their own idea of what constituted edible, and that none of them had ever willingly consumed anything that made their sensory membranes twitch. Varix stood across from him in a filtration mask. The rest of the Silari delegation wore similar gear, their skin faintly glistening under the dome's temperature-controlled lights. "We've reviewed every protocol," Varix said. "No unauthorized samples, no unexpected reactions, and no theatrical displays. I'm not going to juggle the packets, if that's what you mean. There are rumors you once consumed one on a dare." "That wasn't a dare," Zane said. "That was college." A low chime sounded. The observation tiers dimmed slightly and a soft pulse of light moved across the floor, signaling the official start. The translator system engaged with a brief click. Varix raised a palm. "Esteemed delegates, we welcome you to this cultural demonstration. What you are about to witness is not an act of provocation, but of transparency. The human species has developed a complex relationship with food-based chemical stimuli. Today, we explore one such substance to assess its impact, origin, and potential for non-hostile integration." A soft ripple of shifting tones passed through the audience, a common expression of cautious interest among the Tharnic observers. The Dravarians simply folded their wings tighter. Zane stepped forward. "Right? So, this is hot sauce. It's not a drug, it's not a mutagen, and it's not part of any ritual. Humans just like it because it burns a little. That's it." A skilled diplomat in the third row, whose body resembled a pile of glistening cords, emitted a skeptical vibration. "Why would you seek discomfort during sustenance?" Zane held up a packet. "It doesn't hurt. Not really. It's a signal thing. Our bodies think we're in danger, but we're not. It's kind of like riding a roller coaster. If the roller coaster were made of peppers." Another ripple of sound moved through the room. One of the Silari aides activated the containment release. The table hissed slightly as the lock disengaged. A mechanical arm lifted a single packet and placed it on a sterile tray. Varix gestured to a Silari volunteer standing nearby. "This is Specialist Alrin. She has undergone metabolic screening and is equipped with internal neutralizers. She will now ingest a microdose." Alrin stepped forward. Her movements were deliberate, focused. A technician dabbed the packet against a microblade, then transferred an invisible smear to a neutral substrate. Alrin lifted it, paused briefly, and placed it against her intake membrane. She didn't twitch, didn't blink, but her throat sac shifted slightly. The room held its breath. Alrin raised one hand. I detect a soft ignition pattern. Upper thoracic warmth. No distress. Stimulus is invigorating. Several delegates leaned forward. Atharna coughed. Varix turned to Zane. This marks the first successful ingestion by a Silari under monitored conditions. That's great, but you're all holding back. You're thinking, why would anyone do this for fun? He walked to the tray, opened a packet, and without hesitation squeezed half of it onto a cracker. The Silari guards tensed. A few delegates recoiled. Zane popped the cracker into his mouth and chewed. A beat passed. Then another. He gave a small cough and exhaled. See? No hallucinations. No seizures. Just flavor and a little fire. And I'm still standing. A Grell ambassador spoke for the first time. We observed a cardiovascular spike of 10%. Perspiration increased. Respiratory rate rose. You call this normal? Normal for something spicy, yeah. It's not a malfunction. It's part of the experience. Varix stepped forward. Would you consent to a full medical eval immediately? Already set it up, Zane said. Your team can run whatever tests you want. And if anything's off, I'll be the first to admit maybe I shouldn't have eaten that much. An hour later, he lay inside a hybrid diagnostic chamber. Twin arrays pulsed over him, scanning tissue activity, organ function, and neural response. A Silari physician named Drev adjusted the readings and frowned. You have microabrasions in your esophageal lining. Yeah, that's normal. I had chips earlier. Your stomach lining is releasing protective enzymes at 4 times the baseline. Also normal. Your adrenal levels are elevated. Because I'm getting scanned by aliens during a food tasting. Trust me, that's not the sauce. Drev made a note without comment. Your system is compensating in real time. It's as if your biology expects damage and prepares accordingly. That's just what we do. Adapt. Drev considered that. We do not prepare for pain. We avoid it. That's the difference, Zane said. You think discomfort is failure. We think it's a challenge. The next day, the dome's mess hall was converted into a temporary tasting lab. Delegates could register for a controlled exposure 1 drop, 1 observer, 1 reaction report. By midday, over 70 had signed up. A Relian ambassador named Chas arrived early. His species processed food through dermal absorption and had to be wrapped in moisture retention foil at all times. He approached the station, his assistant trailing behind with a medical kit. Zane handed him a sample on a cellulose wafer. This one's milder. Shouldn't do more than tingle. Chas pressed it to his skin membrane. Nothing happened for 3 seconds. Then his eyes widened. I see sharpness, he said. Not pain, but focus. A narrowing. His assistant recorded the reaction. Cognitive enhancement? Perhaps. Chas leaned closer to the tray. May I try a second? Not today, Zane said. We're pacing this. By the 3rd day, the tasting line extended past the sanitation corridor. Silari volunteers rotated every hour. The station was flanked by refrigeration units holding carefully measured samples. No one was allowed more than 1 per cycle. Then, just after 2nd shift rotation, an alarm sounded. Zane ran in, heart pounding. A technician met him halfway. Someone bypassed the intake limiters. They took a triple dose. Who? Specialist Renar. Silari propulsion engineer. He's in the recovery unit. Zane found Renar lying under a cooling sheet, limbs twitching slightly as medics monitored his vitals. I needed clarity, Renar said. I was working on the phase array. The equations kept slipping. But after the last dose, I saw the full vector arc. I completed the model. You could have overdosed. I don't regret it. Varix arrived moments later, flanked by protocol officers. This is exactly why we must halt the program. Curiosity has become dependency. Zane stepped between them. Then regulate it better. You don't shut down a lab because someone skipped a safety step. This isn't a lab. It's a diplomatic facility. And now it's more than that. You've got engineers solving problems, artists composing symphonies, and officials lining up to burn their tongues. You can't go backward. Varix looked at Renard, then back at Zane. You think this is progress? I think it's understanding. You're not scared of us anymore. You're fascinated. Varix didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked out in silence. That evening, Zane returned to his quarters. A package waited on his desk, a sealed container labeled in Silari script. Inside were 2 new sauce packets, one labeled Experimental Variant A. A note accompanied it and signed, "For future collaboration." He stared at it for a long time. Then he smiled just once. By the 3rd week, the novelty had worn off for most humans stationed at Dome Theta. The engineers were back to patching coolant conduits, the diplomatic aides resumed their endless parsing of interstellar trade clauses, and Zane found himself standing alone in the medical wing, shirt off, breathing steadily while a Silari technician scanned his abdomen with a humming wand. "You've got mild inflammation in the upper stomach lining," she said, adjusting the display. "No ulceration, but you're a few meals away from one." "Can I eat cereal?" Zane asked. "That depends. Does it contain capsaicin?" "No. I'm not a lunatic." She powered down the scanner. "Then yes. But you need to skip the hot sauce for at least 4 rotations. That's like asking me to function without caffeine. Caffeine doesn't erode your gastric mucosa." Zane pulled his shirt back on. "Tell that to my college roommate. Drank 7 energy shots and tried to fight a vending machine." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That sounds plausible." He grabbed his data slate and walked out before she could prescribe anything else. The corridor outside was quieter than usual. The Silari had instituted staggered shifts to avoid congestion in shared spaces after 2 delegates got into a shoving match over access to the decontamination chamber. One of them, it turned out, had been hoarding sauce packets in his respiration pouch. Zane turned down the central passage toward the cultural exchange atrium. That's where the trial kitchen had been relocated after the tasting lab became unmanageable. The new setup had individual booths, filtration vents, and a 2-visitor-per-hour limit. From what he'd heard, it was still booked solid through the end of the solar week. A Silari named Marn spotted him from behind the security panel. "You're late. I wasn't told I had a slot." "You don't. But Varix asked for you." Zane raised an eyebrow. "He's in the atrium?" "No. He's in the archive chamber." "Why there?" Marn's voice dropped a few decibels. "He's reviewing the footage from the first week. All of it." Zane exhaled and adjusted his collar. "Great. Nothing like reliving a diplomatic food poisoning incident in high definition." He found Varix hunched over a projection array, 3 screens active, each displaying different angles of the initial tasting sessions. One showed Varn trembling after his first dose. Another captured Alrin's steady posture during her supervised trial. The third was paused on Zane, mid-bite, eyes watering slightly. "You've been watching this for how long?" Zane asked. 4 hours. You know there are better things to binge." Varix didn't look up. I did not understand the appeal. I thought it was a shared delusion. But the patterns are consistent. People like sauce. That's the pattern. No. It's more than preference. There's something ritualistic about your response. The anticipation. The physical endurance. The pride. Zane leaned against the wall. You think it's a rite of passage? Not formalized, but culturally embedded. You assign value to overcoming discomfort. That's not just food. That's most of human history. Varix finally turned. And yet you do not fear it. You wear the consequences as proof of resilience. Sometimes. Other times we just want lunch to feel less boring. There was a pause. Varix tapped a control switch, changing the footage to a chart of neural responses during ingestion. We've begun mapping the shared cognitive patterns among Silari who consumed the sauce more than once. There's a spike in memory recall. A pattern of focus not typical in our species. You're saying it's helping you think? In certain individuals, yes. Not universally, but enough to be significant. Zane crossed his arms. So what's the problem? Varix hesitated. The council is considering a ban. Not because of the health risk. Because of the behavior it's encouraging. Zane tilted his head. You mean the bootleg trading and sauce cult rumors? No. I mean the fragmentation of protocol. Engineers skipping rest cycles. Analysts pushing beyond safe mental thresholds. It's not the sauce, it's what they're doing to get it. Zane straightened. You've never dealt with addiction? Not in this form. Our neurochemistry discourages dependency. We don't design things for stimulation. That explains the nutrient paste. Varix ignored the jab. If the council bans it, they'll also restrict contact with your species until a full behavioral audit is conducted. Zane ran a hand through his hair. That's overkill. You don't ban a culture for having spice. This is not about spice. It's about disruption. He paced once, then turned back. Then let's prove it can be contained. Let us run a full cycle trial with strict limits. Medical monitoring, behavioral logs, scheduled intake only. We'll collect data and show it's not inherently dangerous. Varix studied him. And if it is? Then we all learned something. But if you shut it down now, your people will keep sneaking it. You'll drive it underground. And you'll lose control. A long pause followed. Then Varix nodded once. You have 3 cycles. You manage the program. If it accelerates dysfunction, we terminate. Zane left the archive chamber with the authorization code. By the next rotation, the structured program was in place. Participants were required to log their physical and psychological state before and after each microdose. A team of medics, both human and Silari, oversaw every session. The first to enroll was Varn. He'd been suspended from propulsion work after his unsanctioned intake, but volunteered for the trial immediately. Zane watched as he completed the pre-intake checklist. Sleep duration? The medic asked. 5 standard units. Hydration intake? 2 liters. Any unusual thoughts or dreams? Only that I remembered my birth cove for the first time in decades. Zane raised an eyebrow. I'm not hallucinating, Varn added. It's just clarity. Like fog lifting. The medic recorded the entry and Varn received his dose. Over the next 2 cycles, the data piled up. Of the 32 Silari participants, 19 reported increased memory access. 10 of those demonstrated improved problem-solving, confirmed during simulated drills. The remaining 13 experienced no change or minor discomfort. No one exhibited dependency or erratic behavior. The council reviewed the findings remotely. Varix presented the data himself, stripped of speculation. Just numbers, correlations, trends. And on the final day of the 3rd cycle, Zane was summoned to a closed session with the council liaison. The chamber was darkened, with only a single light overhead. A holographic figure flickered into view, an elder Silari with translucent tendrils and eyes like polished stone. You have facilitated a controlled trial that yielded measurable outcomes, she said. I tried. You prevented further escalation of unsanctioned distribution. We set rules. People followed them. And you avoided cultural contamination. That was never my goal. But I'll take the compliment. She tilted her head. The council has decided not to ban the substance. Instead, it will be classified as a controlled cultural catalyst available only under joint supervision within designated zones. Zane let out a breath. That's surprisingly reasonable. We adapt, she said. Slowly. But we do. The feed cut out. Back in the atrium, Zane found Varix watching the new intake booth being installed. So, Zane said, we're officially spice diplomats now. Varix didn't glance away. You have a way of turning liabilities into systems. You say that like it's a bad thing. It's not. Just baffling. Later that evening, Zane sat on the observation deck with a bottle of antacid and a plain protein bar. Varn joined him with a flask of nutrient broth, the faint scent of cinnamon drifting from it. They're adding flavor now? Zane asked. Just a trace. Inspired by the sauce. Zane nodded. Careful. That's how it starts. Varn chuckled, a dry clicking sound. Perhaps. But we measure now. We do not chase. The stars overhead shimmered uninterrupted. No alarms. No protests. Just quiet. Zane leaned back. You know, I think this is the first time I've been able to relax since I got here. Strange, Varn said. All it took was almost fracturing our entire diplomatic relationship over condiments. Zane grinned. Welcome to Earth's greatest export, chaos bottled. Varn raised his flask. To chaos. They clinked. And for once, nobody ran screaming from the room.